Hello and welcome back to The Perch from the Wyoming Tribune Eagle. I'm Noah Zahn, your local government reporter here. This week on The Perch, our arts and entertainment reporter Taylor Staples spoke with B. Dylan Hollis. Hollis is a Laramie-based social media personality, author, and baker who has over 10 million followers on TikTok. He recently released his second book, Baking Across America, which features niche regional recipes from around the country. Hollis first rose to fame in 2020 when he began posting videos online of him baking old American recipes, which inspired his first book, Baking Yesteryear, which was a cookbook of old and forgotten recipes from across the country. He came to Laramie for school nearly a decade ago from the British island territory of Bermuda in the Atlantic Ocean, and he said he chose Wyoming because he took out a map of the country and picked the place with the least amount of text on it. Taylor's conversation with B. Dylan Hollis begins with him sharing some of his experiences from on the road during his latest book tour. The tour began on May 20th in New York City. Here he is with Taylor now.
It's been really good. I mean, the folks that I've been able to meet along the way, hearing all of their stories of how they first found me, and the amount of people who have been saying, I've been watching you since COVID. Everyone seems to have a connection. And COVID times. And I was like, what? It's so interesting. So
yes.
to answer your question, it's nice to be able to meet everyone that I see in comments that I only know by the usernames, and for them to come out and from varied backgrounds too. I mean, New York City, everyone's a bit different, but we just came from Decatur, Georgia. I did a signing there last night, just outside of Atlanta, and oh my gosh, everyone there in the South is so nice. Southern hospitality is real.
Yes, it is a real thing. Oh my gosh. I love Georgia personally, but yes. Okay. I'd love to be taken back in time. So when you started these books, how did this even come about? How did you get into this? Were you already into cooking and baking? Did these books kind of spark that interest? Tell me how this started.
Well, as you know, I started in August of 2020. That was my first baking video that I uploaded. And of course I did a whole bunch of videos on different topics before then. But in August, that was my first baking video, and I became known for baking recipes through the decades, and I noticed that the comments were all sort of the same thing. No matter what recipe that I did. So I would get comments like, oh, I remember when my mom used to make this, my grandma used to make this. And they were all talking in the same sort of way.
Yes.
Feedback on the videos. But then, Taylor, I would hit a video just randomly. I didn't set out to do this. Bake a recipe. I love this so much. I would bake a recipe that was famous in a particular place. I think the first one I ever did was gooey butter cake. And
that sounds so good.
Yeah, from St. Louis, Missouri. But I noticed the comments were all very different. So instead of saying, yeah, I remember this, or talking about the recipe itself, they were saying things like, this is the pride of my state. You have done my city proud. This is so awesome. And it was all very patriotic.
Yeah.
And I was like, whoa. This is a dessert. This is a recipe. Are we talking about the same thing? Because
right.
You're talking like this is a hometown hero that has returned home. So that's how Baking Across America started, because my second book, that's how that started, because I noticed that there was a lot of magic behind recipes that were famous in a particular place.
Yes, yeah.
Baking Yesteryear, my first book, started just as a perfect opportunity to put to paper that which I did online. I mean, baking through the decades, people had always asked, Dylan, I can't keep up with how fast you speak. It's a lot going on, whatever you're doing on TikTok. Have you ever thought about putting recipes down on the page? And I said, yeah, that would be a really cool idea. And then one day, literally, Taylor, it's just an email you got.
Yeah.
And I received it from my publisher, from an editor, Alexander Rigby at Penguin Random House. Send me an email saying, are you interested in being an author? I thought it was a lot fancier than that.
Yeah. So, where do you find these recipes? Are some of them originals, or are they plays on recipes that you find? Yeah, where do you find these things?
In the, are you speaking about the recipes in the book or the recipes that I do on
Yes.
TikTok?
I thought there was some crossover, but I guess I'm curious for both. Yeah.
On TikTok, all of these cookbooks are sent in to me,
Mhm.
to my post office box
Oh.
from fans. I know, it's so surprising. It started, of course, with real estate sales and estate sales. There's a lot of those in Wyoming, and antique stores. You go down to Laramie or Fort Collins, and next to all of those books, they have old cookbooks. So I started there, but they were sent in to me, to my post office box, and now I have a room full of them. But baking across America, instead of laying them out by decades, my cookbooks, I would lay them out by state. And take Georgia, for example, where I've just come from. In a 100-page cookbook, if there are 20 pages of recipes dedicated to peaches, that tells you that peaches are fairly important to the state of Georgia. So when these recipes would show up a lot in these cookbooks, community cookbooks from different dates, there would be a peach cobbler from 1950s, Decatur. There would be a peach cobbler from 1980s Atlanta, and a peach cobbler from 1990s, Peachtree Corners, which is a city in Georgia, or Peachtree Center. Point being, I would amalgamate all of those, take out the bad parts of others, and include the good parts and then through the whole recipe testing process. But yeah, they're found primarily from community cookbooks. They're all there. In Baking Across America, my second book, all of the cookbooks that I sourced to create these recipe amalgamations, they're listed in the bibliography, which was my one regret from my first book, was that I didn't include like a bibliography.
Oh, yeah.
They come from the same books.
Were you into baking before? Was it a side hobby for you, or?
No. The first time I got my degree in music, Taylor,
Oh.
I was just going to go home and be a music teacher.
Amazing, yes.
Baking was not a passion, nothing to do with it. I mean, it was a video idea. It started as a meme.
Totally.
I said, this is a pork cake. Maybe that would be a cool idea.
I love this.
And show people how awful it is. It ended up doing very well.
So the biggest differences between Baking Yesteryear and Baking Across America is kind of the location, right? Because I feel like, are they restricted by like time era? Because I feel like Baking Yesteryear went really far back, if I'm remembering correctly. So is that kind of the only difference, is you went further back in Baking Yesteryear, and you could also kind of do recipes out of the country or more eccentric, and it was less limiting, or what are the two biggest differences between the books?
Well, simply, Baking Yesteryear was a time travel. It was a way to really put that which I did on TikTok into a book. I mean, every video that I would do on TikTok started with this recipe from 19X and Y. So it would be a fun way to structure a cookbook, and Baking Yesteryear just, the best of the decades. And it gave people something rather, an interesting thing to read, because you can tell the difference between the decades, and you could highlight what changed decade by decade.
Yeah.
So it was a journey through time. Whereas Baking Across America is still a journey, but, that idea came about because,
of your
one
comments.
became aware. Yeah.
Yes.
Because there was magic there. So I said, look, there's got to be more gooey butter cakes. It's not just Missouri. And I mean, sure as night follows day, you see key lime pie, you see Georgia, peaches and pecan pies. And then you go a little bit more in depth, and you find that Georgia, people love hush puppies down here. Or in Louisiana, it's easy with like beignets. So no, the difference there are some really old recipes in Baking Across America.
Mm-hmm.
The difference is just how it's structured and
Yeah.
what is the highlight. Whereas the first book is the highlight of time travel.
Mm-hmm.
You know, this is just a celebration of a vintage recipe road trip right on the subtitle.
And then kind of on that note, since you started writing these books and making these TikToks, what have you learned about yourself? What are some of the biggest like ways you've grown as a writer, as a baker, as a comedian, all that stuff?
In many ways, I have grown in the sense that now I understand a whole new craft. COVID has really done that for us.
Mm-hmm.
So many people started new things that they've continued. The amount of people who started working out, for example, I mean, and then continued post-COVID. The amount of people who now, you know, learned how to knit, learned how to crochet,
Mm-hmm.
can now alter their pants. You know, now they're thrifting more. I mean, so much time on our hands, you know, really opened people up to a whole host of new hobbies. Me included, with baking.
Mm-hmm.
How I've grown through the entire process, I've realized just how large the world is and just how many ways food brings people together. I've always read that. You read that about chefs. You hear that
Mm-hmm.
chefs talk about, you know, food is important here and, you know, it's all around the tables that you set. And I always dismissed it as just like claptrap. Like, oh, you're just saying that. We just eat to eat. But no, Taylor, the responses that I get from not only the recipes that I bake,
Mm-hmm.
you know, on TikTok and YouTube, but the responses I get from the book, when people come up to me, you know, who've never met me, even last night was like, I haven't heard the name of this recipe, they would say.
Mm-hmm.
In like 40 years, this takes me right back to when I used to summer with my aunt up in Martha's Vineyard. And I was
That's
like,
so cool.
whoa. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it's nostalgia. I've learned the power of food. I've learned about the power of nostalgia.
Mm-hmm.
And I've also learned how big the world is, yes, like I said, and how little I know still.
Mm-hmm. But yes, okay, I'd love to ask about the specific recipes in Baking Across America too. So,
Sure.
for this book, what was one of the hardest recipes to find and nail down? And what was kind of one of the last ones that you found and put in the book?
Great question. Like I said before, some were easier. When you think of Florida, you think of the key lime pie.
Mm-hmm.
When you think of Massachusetts, you think of the Boston cream pie. They're in Boston. So those things were easy. Yes, they still required research.
Totally.
They came about fairly easily.
Mm-hmm.
You ask about recipes that I had a hard time sourcing.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah. Think about Wyoming. Think about baked goods. Think about desserts. There.
Mm-hmm.
What comes to mind for you?
Literally
With a unique
nothing.
Baked good. Exactly. And I'm scratching my head here
Yeah.
saying, yes, in Wyoming you can find some distinct, you know, even savory that is hard, but you can sort of carve that out.
Mm-hmm.
If you only do desserts and baked goods, that's really hard. So
Yeah.
Wyoming gave me some of the most trouble
Mm-hmm.
because you had to really get in there.
Okay, so what is the dessert you ended up choosing for Wyoming?
Yeah, there were several. So
Oh.
I had to do a lot of research.
Mhm.
So you think about Wyoming and what we have, even like fruit, it's like nothing.
Mm-hmm.
But we have choke cherries. I don't know if you have them in Cheyenne,
Mm-mm.
but there's choke cherries in Laramie,
Mhm.
and they're awful and they're crap and they're bitter. And if a dog eats them, the dog dies. It's in the name.
Okay.
But making choke cherry jams or jellies is a Wyoming pastime because we have nothing else to make jams and jellies out of.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this old-timey precedent of sweetening muffins and quick breads and all of these things
Mm-hmm.
with jams. It's a Great Depression trick
Mm-hmm.
to like keep preserves. You know, they last forever. You don't waste your sugar. When
Yes.
it's rationed, you don't have to waste that.
Mm-hmm.
So We have a choke cherry sweetened bran muffin from Wyoming, which is, yeah, it's pushing it, but so is the state in general. But that required a lot of research, and there was quite a few choke cherry jam and preserve sweetened bakes from Wyoming community cookbooks. So I chose that. They're called outdoorsman bars, but Wyoming is synonymous with the outdoors.
Oh,
so
yeah.
Included that. And then I won't spoil it too much, but like I love Laramie so much. So the one recipe in baking across America that is sort of built from the ground up, based off of a cowboy cookie, which is not a Wyoming recipe,
but
more
yes,
so a recipe that's been like attached to us.
Yes.
That's my own variation on that. I've been making in Laramie for years. That was just me saying, look, give me one meme recipe in this book so I can say thank you to a town which has meant so much to me. So Wyoming gave me a lot of difficulty. And so did North Dakota.
So I kind of want to pivot to comedy. And yes, so kind of mixing it in with your TikTok. So you've talked about kind of like how you've changed in your relationship with food and your relationship with like just the fans, and like what you said about the power of nostalgia is really interesting. But like, what about your relationship with comedy? Because like that is your TikTok, just being very wacky, and the three W's, and so how has your relationship with comedy changed, and what do you see for yourself in that regard in the future?
I have never considered myself a comedian. This is an easy question to answer. I've never considered myself a comedian. I don't think I could do what stand-up comedians do. That's a whole nother realm of like mastery. And I don't consider myself like the foremost baker. I have fun. I think what draws people to what I do is just let your guard down. Be loosey-goosey. Get involved. And don't take things so seriously.
Yes.
My relationship with comedy hasn't changed because I never sought out for it to be absurd.
Right.
I'm just interacting with what I see as being an absurd new set of ingredients. It's exploration. And like, I've always liked that on a road trip. I've always liked that about everything. I mean, I think if I were a different person, I would be losing it, because compared to my normal standards and how I carry myself, currently I'm incoherent. I would be so stressed that my webcam wasn't working. And, I'm using my phone camera that keeps dropping out momentarily, and it's in a coffee maker.
Oh, gosh.
But I think that's really funny because it's memorable, and I won't ever forget you because of this.
That's
and
so
I think
nice.
it's worth laughing about.
Yeah.
So that's what I do on TikTok. And for some reason, people resonate with that.
Yeah.
Also, So to answer that question, that's not changed. It's just always been my philosophy.
I love that.
It's just laugh at yourself and don't be afraid to. But, and the online sphere, we all need a little more dessert right now. People are down in the dumps, and understandably so. There's just too much negativity. So we just need more positivity. And if some weird guy yelling in his kitchen is positive, so be it.
Positivity, wackiness, and sweet treats are my top 3 personally. So
yes, I like the way you roll.
Yes, exactly. So the future of your brand, what are you thinking? Do you want to keep making baking books like this? Do you enjoy the research enough to continue doing that? Like, what is, or maybe like, would you even consider like doing workshops in the future, like baking workshops, or what do you feel like, where do you feel like your brand is going and your future and you?
That's a good question, because it's weird to hear it be called a brand when like my brand is just me
being yourself, really.
Yeah. I don't see myself doing a cooking school or a workshop. I can answer your question in my own questioning of what's
Go
going
for
on.
it. Yes.
Imagine my surprise where, like, right at graduation, right when I was going home to be a music teacher, my life completely changed to do something different.
Totally.
And I'm sure you've experienced it, and many people have experienced similar things. You never know where it's going to take you. So you're wary to plan too much.
Yeah.
I've been proven wrong about what I was going to do. But now I'm getting too existential for your existential question. I'm just going to ride the wave. So long as people like this content, so long as there are more cookbooks to cook through, to bake through.
Yeah.
And so long as there's this audience and these people who are, like, really happy that I'm doing it, are, like, coming out, they're, like, driving hours and stuff. So long as that continues, I'm going to write it, because I think I'd be a fool not to.
Yeah.
I don't see myself starting brands or starting companies or starting any of that. I do really enjoy writing. I can see a continuation of that.
I love that.
But no, I'm not gonna. There are some people saying I'm gonna do a meme coin for baking or a startup in Los Angeles.
Right.
I'm not about that.
Yeah.
And I'll end this answer by saying that, of course, there's a plateau. Everything plateaus. Everything will fall off. I'm not going to be doing this when I'm 60. I know that much.
Yeah.
But I will for the foreseeable future.
Yeah. My very last question on the book, and that I can think of at the moment, is so Baking Across America, you know, I know this is a ginormous question, but, like, favorite recipe from Baking Across America. What would you make 10 million times over?
Yes, it's a bit like picking a favorite child.
Oh,
isn't it?
right.
My favorite recipe, because I hate cop-outs. My favorite recipe is probably the recipe that is most important to this country. And there's no recipe more crazy and more, like, reformist than the chocolate chip cookie. I mean,
Classic.
the Toll House chocolate chip cookie, invented in Massachusetts, was the literal recipe. People don't realize this. That caused the chocolate chip to be invented. The Ruth Wakefield at the Toll House in Massachusetts just chopped up a Hershey's chocolate bar into her cookie, and it failed to melt completely and left pockets of gooey chocolate. And she says, "Oh, it's ruined. I tried to make a chocolate cookie, and it's just gooey in certain parts." But people loved it, and Nestle invented this to make that more replicable. So the chocolate chip cookie. And I only answer that because you said, what is a recipe that you come back to again and again? And if you bake a lot of something, cookies tend to be amongst them.
100%. Yeah.
If we're thinking, like, right now, summer's just begun. Key lime pie is fantastic. I'll bake that again and again.
So
and if I have
real.
to say, from my 3Ws perspectives, if we're going from, like, TikTok Dylan, the Kool-Aid pie of Nebraska, where Edwin Perkins invented Kool-Aid. And, you know, Nebraska said, okay, we'll use that as a cheap pie flavoring. It's ridiculous. You can choose your flavor, and your pie is going to be whatever color Kool-Aid it is that you choose.
That was our arts and entertainment reporter, Taylor Staples, with author and social media personality and baker B. Dylan Hollis about his latest book, Baking Across America. Now, here's Taylor to bring you a roundup of some of the upcoming events in Cheyenne and Laramie County this week.
Today, June 20th, there's the Cheyenne Mountain Zoo Wildlife Wonders event from 10:15 to 11 a.m. at the library, as well as the Cheyenne Home and Garden Show from 1 to 6 p.m. today and 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. tomorrow at the Cheyenne Ice and Event Center. Then there will be another Hell on Wheels rodeo and chuck wagon dinner, with doors opening at 5 p.m. at the Event Center at Archer / the Laramie County Fair Rodeo Arena. And another Fridays on the Plaza concert will commence with Chingy and opener Winst starting at 6 p.m. at the Cheyenne Depot Plaza. Later in the night, Andy Frasco and the UN will perform at 8 p.m. at the Lincoln. On Saturday, June 21st, there is a free birdwatching field trip at Blair Wallace from 7 a.m. to 1 p.m. People will meet at Lions Park to start. Then there's a Whippersnapper Kids Run and 5K from 8 to 9 a.m. and also 9:30 to 10 a.m. at Lions Park, as well as the Juneteenth Freedom Celebration from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. in Martin Luther King Jr. Park. Later, Paris West will host Summer on the Streets from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. And finally, the Pride Cheyenne Street Fest will be from noon to 6 p.m. in downtown Cheyenne. On Sunday, June 22nd, there will be a We Raise Our Voices event from 12:30 to 2:30 p.m. at the library, a pottery painting event from 1 to 3 p.m. at Cats and Coffee Connections, and an art exhibition and auction from 3 to 5:30 p.m. at Blue Raven Brewery. On Monday, June 23rd, there's an Eras in American Art and Culture event centered around the 1970s from noon to 1:15 p.m. at the library, as well as a Wyoming Walks Walk with Nature event at 12:30 p.m. at the Cheyenne Botanic Gardens. Then there's a matinee movie for mindful aging called Chariots of Fire from 1:30 to 4:30 p.m. at the library, and a Bike to Work Day group ride at 6 p.m. starting at Civic Commons Park. Then on Tuesday, June 24th, there's a Crucible art exhibit reception from noon to 1:30 p.m. at the Laramie County Community College Fine Art Gallery. And then there's 2 cooking and baking with sourdough sessions. One is from 1 to 2 p.m. and the next is from 6 to 7 p.m. at the library, as well as a civic season community conversation about if the government should regulate social media or not starting at 5:30 p.m. Also at the library, there's a Tuesday night book club from 6 to 7:30 p.m. and a sketchbook session with new and old blooms from 5:30 to 7 p.m. at the Cheyenne Botanic Gardens. On Wednesday, June 25th, there's a fitness series session with Ralph Tamur from 9 to 10 a.m. at the library. Then, B. Dylan Hollis is hosting a book signing and meet and greet for his new book, Baking Across America, at noon at Barnes & Noble. Lastly, on Thursday, June 26th, a community art project called The Story Garden will have different sessions from 2 to 6:30 p.m. at the library throughout the day. Then there will be a community block party from 5:30 to 8:30 p.m. at the First Christian Church, and a true crime book club event from 6 to 7:30 p.m. at the library. And finally, there will be a Democracy Under Construction Civic Season event at 6:30 p.m. at the Wyoming State Museum. For more events, go to wyomingnews.com.
And now, before we close out today's episode, here's a quick recap of some of our top stories from the past week. A cash bond of $250,000 has been set for the 19-year-old Cheyenne resident charged with second-degree murder in connection with a fatal shooting last Friday at the West Winds Mobile Home Park. Nathan Pfaff was arrested in connection with the shooting on the death of 18-year-old Ryan Snow early Friday morning at 505 Williams Street. 5 inmates at the Laramie County Jail reported instances of sexual assault or harassment in 2024, but through internal investigation, all cases were determined to be unfounded. There's no way to tell if this is an increase or decrease in sexual assault or harassment at the jail, since it was the first year data has been kept on the subject. Costs of liability insurance increased by around $30,000 for several Wyoming school districts due to the legislature's repeal of gun-free zones in public schools, which goes into effect July 1st. Laramie County School District 1 will pay approximately $28,000 for a new supplemental policy that allows staff to conceal carry, according to the school district's executive director of finance. And finally, several hundred people gathered in front of the Wyoming State Capitol building Saturday afternoon to participate in nationwide No Kings protests. The protesters were protesting the actions of President Donald Trump. And the protests fell on the same day as the parade in the nation's capital, marking the U.S. Army's 250th anniversary that also coincided with President Donald Trump's 79th birthday. That's all for this week's episode of The Perch. Thank you for tuning in, and be sure to check back in next Friday for more.